I've worked from home 90% of the time since I became a data scientist, which has been awesome for me. Your job is not to run an experiment or to build a model. I broke the 200K mark within another 3 to 4 years, and I think it's going to just keep going up from there.
In today's episode, we have Dev, who's a lead data scientist at Recentive Analytics, who has clients like NFL, Live Nation, US Open, and MLB. Welcome, Dev.
Hey, Felix, good to be here.
Yeah, so first of all, you transitioned from a non-traditional background into data science. You worked in management consulting before getting into data science. Tell us more about what motivated you to make that transition.
Yeah, totally. So in college, I studied technology management. And the reason is I was interested in computers and tech, but I didn't feel confident that I could learn coding and be a coder for 8 hours a day. So I went sort of the more business route into that. Ended up doing management consulting for a couple of years with Infosys. And I was with clients like Microsoft and Cisco, doing all sorts of stuff, mostly AI implementation related. And it was a lot of fun, but I realized I would rather build something of my own rather than make a bunch of PowerPoint decks and sit in meetings all day. So I was working with data scientists every day pretty much to implement these AI use cases. And I realized how hard could this really be? Maybe I should try it myself. So after a year and a half of consulting, I took a break, went to that coding bootcamp, General Assembly, and did their data science immersive. And it was actually one of the most fun things I've done in my life. People think boot camp sounds kind of scary and it's like a huge grind, like 80 hours a week coding. But if it's something you find interesting, it flies by really fast. And I really, really enjoyed having like a product that I could look at the end and say like, hey, I built that with my own hands.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a very similar kind of educational background where I went to school for information systems, which is very similar. It was in the business program, the management program there in kind of mixed business and technology. And then also went to boot camp for, I think, similar reasons, which is that you wanted to work on stuff that was tangible that you can actually see at the end of the day. So this route that you took in college where you went into technology management, tell us more about that. Like, what was the curriculum like? Do you recommend this approach for other people that were in the same spot as you, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, good question. The curriculum was interesting. It was like new product launches, understanding the innovation cycle, creative thinking, and then your typical business stuff like accounting, finance, operations. Honestly, I don't really recommend that because that's all stuff you can learn pretty easily on your own. I kind of wish I learned technical skills while I had that 4 years carved out to focus full time on learning. The tricky thing was the university I went to, the computer science program was super competitive. So I didn't even bother, honestly. And then later on, I realized like, oh crap, I actually really want to learn these tech skills. So I don't highly recommend it, but I wouldn't dissuade people from going non-traditional route into tech either, because I did learn really good communication and soft skills that are definitely force multipliers now that I am in tech. I think this is a overgeneralization, but people who with computer science backgrounds, they tend to be really focused on the technical details and like optimizing things, and they tend to lose sight of the business value that's being created. So me having a more business background, I really focus on the value creation and only building things that matter for customers.
Yeah, can you actually talk more about that? Like, can you give an example where someone that might be too heavily oriented towards the tech, where they might obsess about the solution, but not so much like the end product or end solution specifically for that use case, and how you might approach it if you have more of that business, that management background?
Yeah, totally. So in my first data science job with Noodle AI, we were building a supply chain management suite for companies like Kellogg's and Estee Lauder. And I saw a lot of the data scientists obsessing over accuracy metrics and making sure the error is as low as possible. But I was kind of the person who zoomed out and thought about like, hey, does this model really make sense for our customers? It turns out that we were trying to predict inventory in a way that didn't make too much sense to the end user. And we would have never realized that if we didn't step back and look at it from a like operations management perspective and talk to the users and be like, hey, what looks off about this model? Because our error was really good, but it didn't really line up with how shipments work and how demand forecasting works. And we ended up having to kind of change the way that we formulated the problem because of that.
Yeah, for someone that doesn't have this business background, how do you recommend that they grow this insight, this intuition to think more about the end customer and their use cases?
Yeah, I think the holy grail is to just be a user of the product that you're building. Unfortunately, that's not possible in a lot of B2B use cases because we were building stuff for like supply chain planners. So the second thing would be just sit down with your users and kind of shadow them if possible, or do a lot of interviews where you're empathizing with their problems and thinking about how they solve things today and how machine learning could accelerate their workflow.
This ability to zoom out and look at the business use case for any problem that you're trying to solve has been like a differentiator between a great person that has a technical role versus someone that's just good. What are your thoughts on how important is it this skill set to be able to zoom out? Do you find that it's like almost like table stakes at this point?
I think it is becoming table stakes. All of the greatest data scientists I've worked with have a strong domain understanding and this like intuition around what users need. And in a lot of cases, I think it's just a lot of working on the same problem and failing and then realizing, oh, like there's this other angle we need to look at this problem from. So it is super important. I think interviewers are asking about it more and more, like when they do case study questions where you have to think through a business problem end to end and create a machine learning solution for it. And it's kind of tricky to build those skills, but I would say reading even supply chain textbooks helped me. So not being afraid to just get into the shoes of someone with a more business mindset.
So I think the title of data scientist, data science is kind of broad, and it probably changes between different companies. Like, what's like your perspective on like what is considered a data scientist, and what does data science actually mean at a company?
Yeah, great question. It is definitely an ambiguous job title. To me, it means something that a business analyst can't do and that a data engineer shouldn't do. So typically, this means A/B testing and training machine learning models. That's like a data scientist specialty. But in practice, you'll end up doing a lot of business analysis, data engineering, ML engineering, consulting, project management. It really depends on the company and the team's needs. The tricky thing with data scientists is you can do all of those things technically. If you know how to build an ML pipeline, you can probably do some data engineering. You could probably do some business analysis. You might not be the best at it, or you might not enjoy it as much. But I would say if you're a data scientist, try and say no to everything that is not your specialty so that you can do a good job at that. Because a lot of times you'll get pulled in a lot of directions and the machine learning and A/B testing might become like the last thing that you focus your energy on, and you don't get to do a good job at that.
Yeah, and I think this industry is changing very quickly. Like given the years that you've been in this role as a data scientist, what do you see as a data science role in this new AI revolution that we're going through? What kind of trends do you see specifically from the career track perspective?
So when you mentioned this AI revolution, I think of generative AI. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're in a company that is implementing Gen AI, which is a lot of them nowadays, your role might become more tailored towards prompt engineering and kind of post processing generative AI outputs to be useful in a business application. So that's definitely something worth upskilling on. Aside from that, I see a focus on ML ops becoming pretty important now that machine learning pipelines are becoming more mature. We're thinking about how do we retrain models, promote better performing ones, do error analysis in a more streamlined way, all of these things that are kind of you're not focused on when you're first building that ML model.
Speaking of the kind of data that you get access to, your industry focused specifically on supply chain logistics and scheduling. Tell us more about what that industry is and why is it interesting to you?
So one of the reasons I got into data science is because I was really passionate about helping to solve climate change. And I saw that using data more wisely can help reduce all of this industrial waste we have going on and make our processes more efficient, reduce carbon emissions without really sacrificing the things that we're used to, like getting our goods and services. So that's why supply chain and logistics was really interesting to me. I thought there was a huge opportunity there. Honestly, when I first thought about it, it seemed like a really dry and boring industry, like, oh, we're shipping goods around the globe. But from a technical perspective, it's actually pretty neat. There's a huge volume of data available. So you're never like starved for data. For example, like reducing the amount of goods that are stored in shelves that become expired and need to be thrown away by 1%, that can lead to millions and millions of dollars of goods that you're saving. And that translates to however many more customers get served and however many more raw materials get consumed. It's such a huge scale problem, and tiny improvements can really make a big difference.
I was going to ask, so when you in this industry, in this role, what is a day to day? How do you spend your days as a data scientist?
Yeah, really depends on the phase of the project. Most of the interesting work is around like setting up the data pipelines, cleaning and transforming the data so it's useful for an ML model. Some of that can be tedious. Hopefully, you have a good data engineering team to help out with that. But when it comes to feature engineering and thinking about how to best represent this data to the model, then that's where the data science hat comes on. And I think that's probably the highest leverage place that a data scientist can spend their effort is getting the data and features in a good format for the model to learn from. Yeah, you can do hyperparameter tuning and model selection all day long, but I find that that's where less of the fruit is coming from. It's usually around how can you transform the data and bring new data sets in to enrich your feature set so that you can better predict your target. And then the last important piece is the error analysis. Once you have a model trained and your training and test metrics look pretty good, there's a huge long tail of things that can go wrong that may lead to bad decisions. So really looking at your predictions from every possible angle and making sure that they look correct is an ongoing effort.
So when you made this transition from management consulting into becoming a data scientist, you went through boot camp, but obviously still need to do a lot of the work to learn. So for someone that didn't go to school with like a CS degree with or just like a heavy math background, what advice would you give to people that want to make this transition into becoming a data scientist?
Yeah, definitely. You're embarking on a lifelong learning journey. Just doing a 3-month boot camp will give you like the bare minimum that you need to succeed as a data scientist. So be prepared to keep reading, keep looking at new open source libraries and scaling up for pretty much the rest of your career. That's just how tech goes. I'd also say be prepared for a bit of imposter syndrome. I think when you're surrounded by folks with masters and PhDs and research backgrounds building ML models alongside you, and you just have, like 3 months of training in this, it's easy to feel like you're not good enough to be there. I definitely had a lot of that going into this. Um, and if that's the case, then really lean on your strengths. I was able to lean on my strength in communication and kind of be the liaison between the business folks and users and the technical team. So I was making sure that the requirements actually made sense and that we were executing on the right things. And then aside from that, become like a fast learner. That's usually helpful. If you do a boot camp, you probably are a fast learner because you're learning a lot in a short amount of time. But I remember like anytime I heard a new technique, like, XG boost, I'd go read up on that night and then make sure that I'm dangerous the next day, that I could start applying the model and talking about it intelligently.
I think when you think about the career track of like a software engineer, side projects are kind of the path to learn through side projects, kind of well trodden, right? There's mature SaaS out there, APIs, infrastructure, tutorials, even. What does like a side project look like for someone that wants to either learn for the first time or level up their data scientist skills?
Yeah, totally. I think side projects are probably the best way to learn. And one thing I would caution is don't start the project until you find something you're excited about working on. Otherwise, you probably won't finish the project and you won't have anything to show for it. So there's lots of public data sets out there. There's the Titanic data set. There's all these Kaggle competition data sets. There's nothing new to do there. So if none of those excite you, I would just start reaching out to your network and say like, hey, do you have any interesting data that you want analyzed? So in my General Assembly capstone project, I actually had a friend who was working on building Kendrick Lamar's online store, and he had a bunch of data that he wanted to do something with. So I ended up getting access to that and building my whole capstone project around that. I ended up building a model that would be able to offer flash sales to people on the website who were on the fence about buying something and needed that extra nudge to check out. So this was projected to increase conversion rate by 5%. And it didn't actually like make it into production, but it was still a fun project to work on. And it was something that I was excited about. I love music and it was new. It's something that no one else has worked on before. So that's my general advice on side projects. Find something exciting and unique.
Yeah, I think we're at a stage where there's a lot of data everywhere and no one's making a proper or a full potential use out of it. So it's almost like there's a lot of low hanging fruit out there, it seems like. So, in terms of picking the right technology to learn, especially when you are going through side projects or you hear about new technology or models, how do you decipher, especially during this time where there's a lot of hype around data science, models, AI? How do you determine what's like hype versus actually what's something useful for you to actually invest your time in?
Great question. I actually have a quick anecdote to share on this. So I started data science during the whole deep learning revolution. And I was like, yeah, PyTorch, we're going to build transformer models and solve all these supply chain problems. And I got to the job and it turns out that deep learning is not useful for business data because it's all structured data. Deep learning is useful for unstructured data like image and text. So none of our deep learning models outperform the basic like tree-based XGBoost, random forest type stuff. So that was kind of a bummer because I was excited to learn deep learning, but it ended up kind of just being hype for the business data use cases. And, we stuck with what worked well. So That's my general advice. I'm not saying deep learning is overhyped. It's definitely super useful for, text and image. ChatGPT is all deep learning based, but it is very industry specific. So I would
Mm.
say don't be afraid to just look at what other people have done and have worked well. Read some literature and see like what's actually useful. That if you read, research papers, that tends to be fairly hype free versus just like blog posts and Twitter posts. That's a good way of discerning hype from reality. And if you are genuinely excited about learning a specific technique, ask yourself, are you in the right industry? Or should you move to an industry where this technique is useful?
I want to hear more about the actual career change that you made. So you went through this boot camp, you got out. What was the job search like, especially when you don't have a background necessarily that's like a technical background that might fit the typical profile of a data scientist like candidate?
Lean on your network a lot. I ended up with two job offers after my boot camp. One of them was a speaker who came to talk at General Assembly, who I was very proactive about reaching out to. I went and chatted with him, did multiple email exchanges, coffee, whatever. And there's one other company, which is where I ended up joining, Noodle AI. And luckily, someone from the consulting firm I worked at ended up going to that company. And we had worked together pretty closely for a year plus. So he was able to give a strong referral. I think without referrals, I probably might not have had any job offers for many months after that. So that is by far the most important thing to focus on. Not really new information. Everyone tells you, focus on networking. And in the case where you don't have strong network connections at any of the companies you want to go to, then especially in today's job market, it is going to be a lot of like cold outreach, trying to set up informal interviews and that whole process. So it is a grind. And I would say keep at it because something will eventually come through.
When you get that kind of foot in the door through your network, what is the job interview like?
Pretty much the same. Occasionally they'll make you skip some of the early technical screens, like maybe a take home test or something. But otherwise, these companies try and do an unbiased interview process. So it is still hard. I remember when I was interviewing with a chief data scientist for Noodle AI, I went through multiple t-shirts during that interview because I was so nervous. So yeah, can't be understated. Like do your lead code prep, make sure you're fresh on all your skills and have a good night of sleep, all the typical things.
Just like, is there like a round that's like specifically geared towards data science that a generalist software engineer wouldn't go through?
Yeah, totally. So depends on the company. I've done some take home tests that are machine learning focused. So like build a model end to end. I've also done like ML fundamentals interviews where they'll just ask you general questions about, what is the difference between supervised, unsupervised learning, just like basic stuff like that. Sometimes they'll have you do a more product analytics type of interview where you like talk through how you set up an A/B test and analyze the results and see if you fall into any of the common pitfalls of A/B testing. Stuff like that. I think a software engineer interview wouldn't include.
So for people out there that are interested in this career track as a data scientist, can you share more about your income trajectory as a data scientist? Like what can people expect?
Yeah, yeah. I would say my numbers are a bit outdated, but I think I was 2 years into my data science career before I broke the six-figure mark. And then from there was a real bull market in tech. So I broke the 200K mark within another 3 to 4 years. And I think it's going to just keep going up from there, hopefully. I know recently there's been a bit of a reckoning with tech salaries, and we're not seeing raises as often or as high. So there may be a bit of a leveling out right now, but who knows? Maybe in the future, there'll be more investment in tech and salaries will continue going up quickly.
And do you remember like getting that first like job offer to like become an official like data scientist? Like what was that like memory, that experience like?
It was pretty surreal. Yeah, I know it was like the hottest job at the time. And it was also exciting because I got to move to San Francisco. I was living in Seattle and I really wanted to be in a new place and kind of just be on my own. So that was the more exciting thing, honestly. But then, yeah, I was also super nervous about, am I good enough for this role? Like, what if they find out that I'm imposter or whatever. So it's a mix of emotions for sure.
Yeah, it's funny that that feeling almost never goes away, especially when you are like truly challenging yourself in your career. So other than the kind of monetary benefits, which are amazing, what have been like the biggest like work life balance or lifestyle changes since you made this transition, especially coming from a consulting background now into a data scientist job?
So the biggest thing is like remote work is much more possible when you are a coder. So I've been fully enjoying that. I think I've worked from home 90% of the time since I became a data scientist, which has been awesome for me. And then the actual day to day grind, I find really enjoyable. Writing code, making sure it works, seeing it get deployed is really satisfying and rewarding. That's not true for everyone, but it's definitely true for me. And then also just giving myself permission to spend more free time learning about technical stuff has been really interesting. But for me, it's been nice. So yeah, those are the main benefits.
Awesome. So you're interested in AI safety. Tell us more about it. Like, what is AI safety and what attracts you to that track?
Yeah, totally. I have become increasingly concerned about the risks that we face from really capable AI systems recently. There's a lot of resources online to learn about this, but the high level takeaway is in the near term, we have big risks from misuse. So, like misinformation, engineered pathogens that could lead to the next pandemic, cybersecurity, like hacking at scale. All these things are becoming enabled by frontier AI models. And we don't really have great safeguards in place to protect against that. And then on the longer term horizon, we have risks from autonomous AI systems that could go and do long term planning and end up disempowering humanity or doing things that we don't really want it to do, but we aren't able to catch it because we gave too much trust to these systems and they kind of just go off and do their own thing. So there's a whole emerging field of AI safety research, which is roughly less than 1% of overall AI researchers are focused on safety, which is kind of a big problem. I think it should be closer to 50-50, if anything. I've kind of felt a calling to use my skills towards this end and make sure that AI goes well for everyone.
I was gonna say it's just interesting because, like you mentioned, only a very small percentage of there's investment in AI safety. I think it's almost like there's no guardrails, no regulation. I think kind of like capitalism, where profit at all costs comes into play, where there's kind of like no incentive to be safe, or at least not that strong incentives. Do you see this changing? Like, what are your thoughts on will we ever get close to 50-50 in your opinion?
I'm not super confident that we'll get close to 50-50. I am more confident that government regulation could play a bigger role in making sure that AI systems are safe. If we're able to prove that, today's systems are already pretty dangerous, then maybe we'll have more restrictions on which models you're allowed to open source or which models you're allowed to train above a certain capability threshold. And then it could be that we don't actually need 50% of AI researchers to work on safety to solve the technical alignment problem. This means like having AI systems that are provably safe, that will do stuff that is aligned with human values.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's an answer to this, but like if knowing you see the path that we're on, the and you have thoughts about the future that we're heading towards. Is there anything that individuals can do to prepare for a future like this, where there's like let's say a hard takeoff, where you mentioned like the future concerns around AI safety or alignment just aren't there? Is there anything an individual can do about it?
So one thing you can do is vote with your dollars. There's a movement called effective altruism that invests heavily in AI safety. So there's a charity called the Long Term Future Fund. You can donate to that, and those funds will go towards AI safety research. I think that's probably the highest leverage way an individual can contribute without having like deep technical expertise in ML. Other than that, I think there is a policy angle where you can vote for politicians that are more in favor of AI regulation and safety. And, you'll have to do some research to figure out who is good there. But there are organizations like the AI Safety Institute that help guide you towards, who to vote for that'll be useful towards these ends. Those are the two big ones. And then, yeah, if you do have ML skills, then definitely consider working directly on safety.
I'll leave you this last question. What do you think is your hottest take about the data science career track
The hottest take.
or data science in
Um,
general?
Yeah, good question. Couple of things come to mind. Like, I think error analysis is way underrated. I think data scientists are way too focused on like building a model and deploying it and not enough on validating to make sure it's good from a business perspective. And then another hot take is that your job is not to run an experiment or to build a model, it's to create business value. So do whatever does that and don't worry so much about which cool machine learning algorithm you're using or anything like that. Those are my general thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, no, I think the last one definitely seems like a spicier take where I think goes back to your point about how people that are more technically inclined tend to get obsessed about the latest technology or training and all that, but like not so much about like what is the business value at the end of the day. So I think it's often overlooked perspective. So thank you so much for your time, Deb, who is a lead data scientist at Recentive Analytics. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your journey, your advice and experience with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Felix.